Okay, we will start talking about clusterings and different algorithms. The principal idea behind clustering is where we try to group our objects. The objects in a group are similar to one another and different from the objects in other groups. For example, assuming you are hiking in the mountains and you found a group of plants. They look similar, but they're not identical. Though you don't know these plants types as they are unlabeled data to you, but you still can differentiate and say, well, these plants look similar. In other words, they belong to the same species, same group or cluster. So taking the famous example iris dataset. So what is the difference would be when we apply classification and clustering? So in classification, we are doing a supervised data mining task because the labels, the type of the flower, for example, to the iris dataset are known to us. So if you take a look to the figure on the left-hand side where we see our dataset has been labeled. So in this case, if we are interested to find the label, we are dealing with a supervised data mining task. And in particular, we are talking about a classification problem. On the other hand, if we have unlabeled data, like the figure on the right-hand side, where the data is unlabeled, so we cannot distinguish one type of flower from the other. Yet, we are interested to group them together based on their features to find those clusters or those groups where these plants or these types of objects, let's say, the objects belong to one group. Clustering has many applications. Here we have a few examples. Clustering can be applied for customer segmentation problem. So assuming you have a data set and this data set contains the activity and purchases for the customers, and you are interested to segment these customers, to cluster them into different groups. Well, why this can be useful to you? Because based on these clusters, you may find what features or what is the similarity for these different groups. I mean, what the characteristics, let's say, to be precise, for each of these group or each of these clusters. And then based on that, on these findings, you can adapt products and marketing campaigns to each of these segments. And another example where you can still apply customer segmentation where you are building or using a recommender systems. So a recommender system will suggest content that other users in the same cluster enjoyed. And another example where we can apply clustering is anomaly detection outlier. So one of the famous algorithm, or the one that we are going to discuss, is dbScan. dbScan defines each object to either 3 categories while it does clustering. Either it can be a core point or border point or anomaly point. So we can use clustering to enable anomaly detection. Further examples of clustering applications is search engines. So assuming you have tons of images or you have images and you are interested to build a search engine. So what do you do first? You apply clustering algorithm where you can take all the images and group them, and then those similar images would end up in the same cluster. Now later, when the user provides a reference image, all you need to do is to use the clustering model that you found or you built earlier to find the images cluster. And you can simply return all the images from this cluster. Another example is image segmentation. So what image segmentation is simply is where you try to cluster pixels according to their color, then replacing each pixel's color with the mean color of its cluster. So after you cluster these pixels, then you can replace the pixels colors inside the cluster by the mean color. And this can be useful because as we are reducing the number of different colors inside the image. And then we can apply object detection, and also it's useful for tracking systems. There are different types or kinds of clusters, but the one that we are going to discuss are three types. Center-based clusters, or also it's known as prototype-based clusters, where these type of clustering algorithm look for instances centered by applying the centroid, such as k-means that we're going to discuss next. Other types of clustering, such as density-based clusters, these types of algorithm look for continuous regions of densely packed instances. And dbScan is one example that we're going to discuss later on. The final type of clustering that we're going to discuss is hierarchical-based clusters. These types of algorithms look for clusters of clusters, which is called hierarchical. Other criteria to differentiate between the types of clusters is whether they are applying partitional clustering or hierarchical clustering. Partitional clustering, a division of data objects into non-overlapping subsets. So in other words, an object can only belong to a single cluster. These types of clustering called partitional clustering. The other type is hierarchical clustering. In hierarchical clustering, the algorithm allows a set of nested clusters organized as hierarchical tree. So in this case, as we might have or as we might end up with nested clusters, so a data point or object can belong to more than one cluster. Here we have an example about partitional clustering illustration. So on the left-hand side, we have the original points, and then after we applied partitional clustering algorithm, these data points ended with only a single cluster. So in other words, we don't have overlapping clustering. In other words, we don't have a single point that can belong to more than one cluster. So unlike partitional clustering, hierarchical clustering allows or enables a data point to be or to belong to more than one cluster because of the idea of nested clusters. So here we have two examples of hierarchical clustering where we see that we have overlapping clustering, where data points can belong to more than a single cluster. The clustering algorithms that we are going to discuss are k-means and its variants, hierarchical clustering, and density-based clustering.